President Trump used his remarks last night to make exaggerated and at times unsubstantiated claims about election security, all while he's calling on Congress to pass a voting regulations bill ahead of those midterm elections.
Our elections were left vulnerable to being rigged and stolen.
During his primetime address last night, President Trump doubled down on unsubstantiated claims the 2020 presidential election, which he lost, was rigged, and he accused China of accessing voter data,
resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers.
Most of that information is publicly available, and Trump did not say how or if Beijing used it. Though the U.S. intelligence community assessed in 2021 with high confidence that China did not try to influence the outcome of the 2020 election. And in a statement, China said it has never and will never interfere in the presidential elections of the U.S. Trump accused the deep state of covering up the truth.
Those responsible for sounding the alarm instead kept the information secret and hidden.
However, another intelligence assessment from April 2020 during the first Trump administration did raise the alarm that Chinese officials had analyzed bulk voter registration data from multiple U.S. states. And this:
hundreds of thousands of non-citizens and dead people are listed and active on the voter rolls.
The president raised concern about undocumented immigrants voting, claiming without presenting clear evidence to back it up that DHS found 278,000 non-citizens on voting rolls nationwide. And he used that claim to again push lawmakers to pass a voting regulations bill that would establish national voter ID, proof of citizenship standards, and dramatically curb mail-in voting.
Congress must pass the Save America Act.
Democrats warn Trump is using the past to sow doubts about the upcoming midterm elections.
He's laying the groundwork for a potential challenge to the result. Another bad faith challenge.
President Trump says the administration is notifying states whose voter data they consider compromised by China, along with information about non-citizens on their voter rolls.
What is the U.S. president alleging?
Well, there are expectations this was going to involve new allegations of foreign interference and documents, and that was exactly what the U.S. president delivered.
Tonight, I'm announcing the immediate declassification and release of critical intelligence revealing shocking vulnerabilities in our election infrastructure. This evidence shows that the election system we have dangerously exposes like levels never thought possible to hacking, exploitation, and foreign interference.
Those documents can now be found on the official White House website. Trump made numerous allegations of election interference, including from China and the so-called deep state. He also alleged Americans have been lied to about the security of election infrastructure, including electronic voting machines, ballot counting systems, which he says are vulnerable to hacking from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and others. And he's also alleging hundreds of thousands of people voted illegally in the 2020 election. Just listen to this.
Even this limited analysis found more than 250,000 foreigners illegally registered to vote. Put together, these disclosures reveal an election system so broken and so vulnerable that no one can possibly defend it.
Now, Trump is particularly focused on the 2020 election, which he lost to Joe Biden. Important to note, numerous courts and audits, forensic analysis found no evidence of manipulated election results. And a national intelligence report said that they had no indications of any foreign actor attempting to alter any aspect of the voting process of those elections, and that includes registration, casting ballots, tabulation, results reporting. So Trump also renewed his plea to senators to push through a contentious voting reform act, the Save America Act, which has voter ID rules that critics say would prevent millions of eligible voters from casting a ballot. There was a lot of consternation on both sides of the aisle, particularly among some Republicans who were deeply worried that by focusing on election grievances, it's going to work against the messaging they need to hit home to voters, like affordability ahead of the midterms coming up in November.
Trump's latest speech has become one of the biggest political stories in the United States. It has generated widespread debate because of the claims he made about election security, voting systems, and alleged foreign interference. Welcome to the Reality Room, your source of breaking political news, trending stories, and in-depth analysis of issues shaping America. Please do well to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, click on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our videos, and of course, drop your thoughts in the comment section.
Donald Trump's big election speech from the White House tonight was a bust because he presented what he claimed were several problems and then suggested legislation that didn't address the problems. So Trump claimed that China was trying to interfere and meddle in our elections, and basically he claimed China was trying to steal our elections, break into our voting machines, and the voting machines are really unsafe. He claimed. Not true, but his solution to that is banning mail-in voting and requiring IDs. Well, if your claim is that China is going to easily break into our voting machines and change all the votes, it doesn't matter if you ban mail-in voting, right? If you stop me from voting by mail, China's still going to change my vote later. If you make me get an ID to vote, China's still going to change my vote later. So if Trump is telling the truth, let's just pretend he's telling the truth tonight, and oh my God, China's ready to hack our election and our voting machines are really insecure, then why is he proposing legislation, this SAFE Act, he calls it, that doesn't address any of those problems? You get it. Now, he didn't actually present any evidence of China at risk of hacking our election. He said China actually helped the Venezuelans cheat in their own election in 2020 or something. And it's like, yeah, the Venezuelan dictatorship, the Marxist dictatorship cheated in their election. No S, Sherlock, right? And the Chinese helped them. Okay, what does that have to do with us? The only thing he claimed the Chinese did to us, apparently they broke, he claims, let's pretend it's true, into voter registration databases and stole a bunch of our information, our names, our phone numbers, things like that. The kind of stuff that we always lose when companies get hacked, right? And when they hack our stuff. Okay, that's bad, but that has nothing to do with voting machines. They didn't actually meddle in the election. They didn't try to change votes. They didn't go after the machines. So again, if our voting registration information is at risk from China, why isn't the legislation you're proposing making it harder for China to steal our voter registration information? That's not what he's doing. He wants to ban mail-in voting and require IDs. You get it. Tonight was a bunch of BS. No big surprise. He also spent the first 10 minutes talking about what a great president he was and went, rambled for 10 minutes. But bottom line is, he's lying again. He's putting out misinformation. And, big freaking surprise.
Donald Trump just gave a national address where he looked right into the camera and lied. Lied about costs going down. He lied about the economy being great for workers. He lied about the war in Iran. And then he turned to his biggest lie about the 2020 election in order to undermine the American public's faith in their own vote and our democracy. But what does he think? We're stupid? Because we know the costs are up. We know that we're still at war with Iran. And we know it can't just be that every election that he wins is free and fair and every election that he loses is rigged. That just doesn't make sense. So here's the thing you should learn about tonight. President Trump used his nationally televised address not to address your needs, not to address the country's priorities, but demanded that Congress pass a bill right before the election that would change the way people vote, how they vote, mean less people can vote. Because he's an unpopular president that knows if people vote and vote their pocketbook, they vote their communities, and they vote their interests, his party will lose. We're not stupid. Voters aren't stupid. This is about a democracy with your vote at the center. This is about a democracy that puts your interests ahead of the cronies, the billionaires, and the corrupt class that is circling Trump's train in Washington. So don't lose the plot. Stay focused on we, the people, and don't believe the lies.
Based on how hard they're crashing out this morning, I don't think MAGA fully understands why Donald Trump's speech tanked last night. In fact, I know they don't, because based on a new Washington Post poll, they're the only group in the country that believes the economy is going to get better in the next year. See, 10 years ago, he crashed out because he couldn't believe a woman got more votes than he did. 6 years ago, he crashed out because he couldn't believe we took his power away from him. And right now, instead of explaining why it keeps getting more expensive to live in this country, even though nobody's getting promotions or raises, instead of explaining why he had to reboot his forever war with Iran, instead of explaining why they've charged more people with crimes related to the reflecting pool than the files, he gave a primetime speech to cry about why he lost power 6 years ago so that he wouldn't lose more power 4 months from now. And it seems MAGAs are the only people who don't understand that he wouldn't have this problem in the first place if he spent the past year and a half with his nearly unquestioned power making our lives better instead of paying the people he pardoned to shoot immigrants in their vehicles. See, FDR, Ronald Reagan, JFK, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, they all got more done with less power than Donald Trump has in this term. term. Just look at this question from the same poll. Would you say you are better off financially than when this person became president? They compared every president going back to Reagan, and right now more people under Donald Trump say that they are not as well off than said about any other president in over 40 years. And this isn't just a low point, because right now more than twice as many people say the economy is going to get worse over the next year than say it's going to get better. But this gelatinous shitberg wants to take our time to complain to us about what might happen if he loses power. If we could all be so lucky.
I am taken, Senator, by the fact that it is less than 24 hours since the president delivered that speech, and already Markwayne Mullins is operationalizing this administration's agenda.
That's right, Alicia. Look, we're seeing a full-on assault on our federal elections. President Trump last night in an Oval Office speech didn't talk about rising costs, didn't talk about the ongoing war with Iran. He rehashed what are now 6-year-old conspiracy theories, classified information that's already been released, things that happened when he was president and the people he chose led our intelligence community, and delivered no new concrete evidence to prove that there was any impact on the 2020 elections. Alicia, you know well, and your viewers know well, that President Trump and his supporters went to court over and over and over in 2021 trying to prove that there was fraud in the 2020 elections. They failed in every single federal court case. And for Markwayne Mullins, the Secretary of Homeland Security, to now be threatening criminal sanctions for those who won't purge illegals out of our voter rolls is just another step in undermining confidence in our elections. President Trump has over and over said he can only lose if the election is rigged. That's not true. In fact, the only person we know interfered in the 2020 election was President Trump himself, when he picked up the phone and called Georgia's Secretary of State, the man in charge of elections, and said, "Go find me the votes that will let me win Georgia." I trust the American people and our election system. Yes, there are challenges and vulnerabilities, and the way we deal with them is by investing in the state, county, and local infrastructure of elections, not by spreading more falsehoods and lies, not by giving a primetime address littered with sinister innuendo, but no new concrete facts.
If you watched President Trump's speech last night, here's what election experts are saying. They argue that many of the claims that he repeated about the 2020 election have already been investigated through audits, court cases, and reviews that did not find evidence the certified outcome was changed. They also say the new information presented so far has not publicly demonstrated that votes were altered. Experts warn that repeating unsupported claims can erode public confidence in future elections, which I think was the goal. But here's the contradiction that's hard to ignore. Donald Trump was the president of the United States when the 2020 election took place. If the system was as broken as he now claims, then he was the president responsible for overseeing the federal government at that time. And today, currently, his administration is cutting funding, reducing staff, and eliminating parts of the federal infrastructure that support election security and cybersecurity and election infrastructure. If your message is that election systems need to be stronger and more secure, why are you weakening the very institutions designed to help protect them from said attacks? Whether you are a Republican, which I used to be, or you are a Democrat or an independent, which I am now, we should all want the same thing: secure elections, credible evidence, and leaders willing to strengthen the system, not just criticize it. Facts matter. Accountability applies to everyone.
What have you heard over the last, 10 minutes or so since we called out of that speech that's disturbing to you? What stuck out to you?
Well, it got worse. In a little bit, it's a little bit like trying to argue with like a raving crazy person standing naked next to you on the subway claiming they're Jesus Christ, that they're not actually Jesus Christ. Like, well, Jesus Christ was born 2,000 years ago and you're standing like it's so off the table of what is, plausible, rational. But one of the really insidious sections right after we got out is him basically saying, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, that a whole bunch of foreign entities, Iran, China, I think North Korea, have the ability, the capability of essentially a mass hack of the voter system to change over votes. Now, my understanding is that that's just completely not true, that there is no assessment of that. I'm not an expert in cybersecurity, but what's insidious about that, right, is he's creating the rationale to claim a loss is the result of some hack, right? That's very clearly what this is about, right? So he's trying to undermine confidence in the system. He's trying to create some sense that there's vulnerabilities there so that in the future, a loss, he can say, was the result of this nefarious foreign actor. And it's very clear that that's what that section of the speech is trying to do.
No question. I mean, it is trying to lay the predicate for the future. It is trying to rewrite the past. They're all completely related.
But I don't think the problem, is that our elections aren't secure, because we control the House, we control the Senate, we control the White House, and in some degree we control the Supreme Court. So I asked my Republican colleagues, why are you complaining about election fraud? We won all the damn elections.
In Trump's speech tonight, he is seeking permission from the American people to stay in power. I mean, why wouldn't he? Him, his inner circle, and his family are making billions and billions and billions of dollars through crypto, through insider trading, through no-bid contracts. They're making the most money that they've ever made in their entire lives. And everybody outside of that circle is suffering, which Thomas Massey goes on to explain that right there is actually the real fraud.
The fraud that's going on is we're not holding ourselves to the promises that we made of fiscal responsibility, putting America first, making America healthy. The problem is we're wasting the opportunity that we were given in these elections, that we won, all of them.
So Republicans, if you want a select few of insiders to get rich beyond their wildest dreams while your ass suffers, please buy Trump's bullshit. Because somehow MAGA Republicans control the entire federal government, yet the deep state Democrats are the ones that really hold the power, right? You fucking believe that?
So the President of the United States gives a primetime address to the entire country. And with everything going on right now, this motherfucker spends it bitching about the 2020 election. Are you fucking kidding me? People are dealing with skyrocketing grocery bills. Entire communities are underwater. Other parts of the country are literally on fire. Smoke is making the air unsafe to breathe in multiple states. We're being told to avoid fruits and vegetables so that we don't get diarrhea. He got us involved in another endless war overseas. People can't afford rent, can't afford health care, can't afford to exist, but this is what we're doing. And the best part, he was the fucking president during the 2020 election. His own administration investigated it. Courts have thrown out lawsuit after lawsuit because there is no evidence that widespread fraud changed the outcome. But right now, right before the midterms, we're dragging all this shit back out again. At this point, we all know what he's doing. He's laying the groundwork. That way he can tell everybody that the election was stolen when it doesn't go his way in November. Imagine you have the biggest microphone in the country and using it to bitch and whine about 6 years ago instead of talking about any of the problems that people are actually living through today. This man and this entire administration is fucking embarrassing.
Trump has once again in his latest speech placed the issue of elections, trust and political division at the center of America's national conversation. However, critics argue that repeating claims about past elections without new evidence risk damaging public trust in democratic institutions. They say the focus should be on solving current problems like the economy, inflation, and the challenges facing ordinary Americans. The bigger question is not only what Trump said, but why this message continues to resonate with millions of Americans. At the end of the day, America is facing a deeper debate. Can a democracy survive when large number of citizens no longer trust the institution that govern them? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section.
Trump just used a presidential address to prepare Americans to distrust an election that has not even yet happened. And that is the real story here. because for roughly 25 minutes, Trump revived his claims about the 2020 election, accused China of interfering, attacked American intelligence officials, demanded prosecutions, condemned voting machines, and pushed Congress to pass the Save America Act before the November midterms. The White House promised information that would shock the country, but the alleged bombshell was not a bombshell at all. Trump claimed China had obtained information connected to approximately 220 million American voters. That sounds terrifying until you learn that voter registration files containing names, addresses, and political information are often publicly available or legally purchased by campaigns and political consultants. Obtaining voter data is not the same thing as changing voter registrations, creating ballots, or altering votes. And Trump presented no evidence that China changed a single vote in 2020 election. In fact, the intelligence assessment produced under officials Trump himself appointed concluded that no foreign government altered voter registration ballots, vote counting, or election results. Some of the documents Trump released actually undermined his own argument. One said voting systems would be difficult to manipulate on a scale large enough to change an election. Another concerned elections in Venezuela, not the United States. But evidence was not really the point. Psychologically, the speech was about preemptive delegitimization. You introduce the idea that the system is contaminated before people even vote. Then if your party wins, the election was protected, but if your party loses, you already have an explanation: foreign interference, voting machines, mail ballots, non-citizens, corrupt officials, the deep state. It creates a belief system that cannot be disproven, because every piece of contradictory evidence becomes further proof of the supposed conspiracy. And notice the timing. Republicans are defending extremely narrow congressional majorities. Trump is facing public frustration over prices and increasingly unpopular war with Iran, but instead of devoting a national address to the cost of living or explaining where the Iran war is going, he mentioned Iran briefly, declaring that America was winning big, and moved immediately toward the election. He even explicitly reminded viewers that important elections are coming in November. That is why this matters.
Here's what we need to understand about Donald Trump's election security speech last night. He told us that the Chinese somehow got their hands on a ton of voter data. Okay. What he did not say, and what he cannot say, is that somehow the 2020 election vote totals had been messed with, that somehow votes had been switched. The only person who tried to switch votes in the 2020 election was Donald Trump himself, who called election officials in red states and demanded that they find him votes. There is no evidence of corruption in that election. Donald Trump himself has litigated that case dozens of times and lost in court every time because he has no evidence to prove it. The reason he's talking about 2020, the reason he still talks about 2020, is because he's trying to cast doubts on the 2026 election. The reason he needs to do that is because he and the Republican Party have failed at delivering every promise they made during the 2024 campaign. Donald Trump promised us no forever wars in the Middle East and promptly gave us one. Donald Trump promised cheaper food, gasoline, housing, healthcare. He has delivered none of that. This is a culture war from a party that has nothing to offer in terms of the real challenges Americans are facing. They know it, we know it, and this upcoming election is going to reflect that. So what the Republicans are stuck with is that they have to try to suppress the vote, they have to try to gerrymander their way into another majority in the Congress, but pressure is growing for them to deny the election results. Donald Trump will send his corrupt Kash Patel FBI into blue states to seize ballots. He will refuse to accept the results in the election, and Mike Johnson, his ever-willing toady, will refuse to seat Democratic congressmen who get elected. So here's what we can do. There's several steps you can take. One, make sure you're registered to vote and vote blue no matter who. I'm sorry if that's difficult, but it's got to be done. Second, volunteer as a poll worker. Go to powerthepolls.org and sign up to become a poll worker so that we have adequate election staffing for every single precinct in this country. And then be prepared to go into the streets for days or even months in massive nonviolent protests in order to demand that legitimately elected Democratic officials be seated in the Congress and wherever else they belong. The Republican Party is preparing to try and nullify the results of the 2026 election. And that's what Donald Trump really told you last night.
To address some shit that he said in this speech. First of all, he said they've had great battlefield victories. No, you haven't. There's no battlefield, first of all. We need to stop letting them write these little movie scripts out and then say them to us like we're supposed to believe them. What they've done is they've just bombed things. There's been bombings. That's not battlefield victories. That's just dropping bombs from airplanes. That's easy to do. It's very expensive for us. We're